Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me. And today we will talk about why dog fooding is important for every developer and how I built my own dog fooding Slack app called GibPotato. I'm Michi. I work as a software engineer at Sentry in Vienna. And there, most of my time I spent working on our PHP and Go SDKs, and then also sometimes on my small side project there. If I'm not coding, I really like running around the city, taking photos, and I'm really into everything aviation related. So when you're reading this quote from Michael Scott, it makes total sense that Apple, back then close before they released the first Macintosh, or the first Apple computer, that they would abandon typewriters in their office and start to use their own hardware, right? Because why would anyone buy any product from Apple if they don't use it themselves? Like, how could they have the confidence in their own product if they don't even use the products themselves? And it's also important that not just like people that like develop the hardware and software, no, like everyone at the company should use the product. Yeah, and I think today when you look at an Apple office, probably everyone is wearing an Apple Vision Pro. So what is dog fooding? It's actually pretty simple. You eat what you cook, you use what you build yourself. So to get started, let's talk a little bit how we at Sentry, which programming languages we used, how we write our software, and also how we dog food the software we write at Sentry. When it comes to new features in Sentry, we normally test them like in our Sentry project, right? So Sentry itself is monitored by Sentry. And every time we add like a new feature to the UI, we put it behind a feature flag, deploy it to production, then we can test it. And then sometimes shortly after we release it like to a small alpha cohort, could be some customers or other related parties. Then we move it to early access. So this is something our customers can actually opt into. And then for a week or so, we run it there, listen to feedback, fix some stuff. And then later we push it out to GA, so it's available for everyone. And then of course, like we do a monthly release cycle for our self-hosted version. So we just have like one monthly release on GitHub, but the code is of course there. So I actually know a few folks that run like nightly on their own hardware, which is living on the edge. But that's also helps us a lot. So yeah, and when it comes to dog fooding, sure, like we have an error in Sentry, we report to Sentry. But with that, there's actually a problem because Sentry is not just the UI where you can see errors. There's also like a big ingestion pipeline in front of the UI that accepts like all the crashes and performance data. And if there is an error there, then we kind of run into a problem. Because where should this report to, right? So that's why we have Sentry for Sentry, right? So this is a completely separate instance of Sentry, and this is basically used to catch like these early ingestion problems because they would basically create a recursive loop in the normal ingestion pipeline, and that's why we have it. And I heard the tales that there might also be a Sentry for Sentry for Sentry, which in the end is just Sentry again. We came full circle. So the programming languages we use at Sentry, the majority of Sentry is like a big Django monolith. So it's written in Python using the Django framework. And this monolith takes like care of like most API calls, database access, all the business logic, subscriptions, and so on and so forth. In the front end, we use React, and it's completely TypeScript by now, I think, almost, or it is. And then there are a few things where Python might be a little bit too slow. And for these additional layers, we run some actual microservices, and they're written in Rust. So where performance is really critical, like our ingestion service, like our proxy relay is written in Rust, and our symbolication tool or service called symbolicator. So this basically, like when you send us minified JavaScript, you can upload your source maps, and then we will untangle this for you, so you have a usable stack trace. But when it comes to our SDKs, that looks completely different. So we probably support almost everything under the sun. So our SDKs range from like C, C++. At one point, we had a Perl SDK. And of course, all the new stuff, like various JavaScript frameworks. We support Ruby and all the frameworks there, .NET, Java, and a lot of more different things. So when I joined Sentry roughly 2 years ago and looked at what software Sentry runs in production, I immediately noticed a really, really big problem. There was not a single PHP application running at Sentry when I joined. And that was a big problem for me because back then, day to day, I worked on the PHP SDK. And the best way to test the PHP SDK is to test it on a PHP application. But as I recently transitioned jobs, I of course didn't have access to the big CakePHP application I was working on. So yeah, I mean, I still had like small side projects with like 0 users, but you can't really test an SDK in them, right? Like they don't see any traffic. All they would do is like creating artificial data, which doesn't reflect a real world scenario at all. And like just having like a cake, a small cake app, like when you follow the tutorial, like the block you create there, that doesn't really cut it well. And I mean, I've now seen quite a few programming languages, and I still believe that PHP is like one of the best and most mature ecosystems out there, right? When it comes like to feature completeness, to developer experience, to speed of iteration, PHP is like one of the best ecosystems there are. So yeah, and I mean, when it comes to Cake, sure, like everything is included from an ORM over templating, so that really helps a lot. So because there was no PHP at Sentry, I thought, let's sneak in some PHP. And what was important is that this application should be something that everyone uses, a little bit at least, internally, but it shouldn't be mission critical. So this has a few reasons. Probably people would have yelled at me if I would have deployed PHP to production into the Sentry code base. And like we don't have a lot of PHP developers like at Sentry. Probably every Sentry engineer at one point touched PHP, at least the older ones. But they like most of them stopped at PHP 4 or something like that. So yeah, that's when I came up with GibPotato. So let me tell you how this came to be. When I joined in August 2022, our Slack appreciation app we used at the time suddenly stopped working. And the reason was that the credit card we had on file simply expired. So they couldn't renew this subscription, so the service was turned off. And people were like a bit outraged back then because like everyone really enjoyed using this application. So they were starting like, hey, can we turn it back on? Oh my God, oh my God. And then, well, the problem was that the service, Sentry, at this time paid like $10,000 per year for this one Slack app. That's a lot of dollars for a Slack app, if you ask me. So our back then CTO and co-founder David Kramer, he was like, "I'm not gonna pay this," and he suggested that instead someone should hack week this, as we call it. So at Sentry, once per year, we basically shut down the entire operations for a full week, and everyone is welcome to work on some side project. Can be related to Sentry, can be something completely unrelated to Sentry. And Hack Week has been had quite a big impact at Sentry itself, because like some people, they maybe try out like a new feature they would never build instead, or they create a new SDK, which then later we actually publish. So yeah, this helps us a lot, and that's where I saw my chance. So I was like, okay, I'll use the stack I've always been using. So I will build something in CakePHP. For the front end, I use Vue.js, mostly because React, I think, is pretty boring, and everything is written in React these days. And I think Vue is cool, so I chose Vue.js. And to be fair, I didn't know anything about React, and I knew a bit about Vue.js. So I got together with like with a small team and was pitching them this, and they were like, "No, we are not building this in PHP." So these people were quite young, and they were like, "No, let's use JavaScript. Oh my God, it's so much better. PHP is so old," which I think is really pathetic to have this opinion. But I didn't really feel comfortable doing it in JavaScript, because like I built quite a few Express apps over the years, and it kind of became boring. So I still saw a chance and was like, let's use Dino, like this newish JavaScript server runtime. It's really exciting. It was new back then, and nobody of us has touched it before, so I thought like, hey, maybe it's a good opportunity to learn something new. So after 20 minutes of evaluation, we figured out, no, we don't use Dino. Back then, Dino didn't support like existing node packages, so the ecosystem was severely lacking in functionality. And yeah, I mean, once again, I told them, hey, if you use something like CakePHP, we have like an OAM, and we have an authentication system, and everything is built in. Like, we don't have to think about any dependencies, but nope. They didn't listen. So in the end, we actually figured out that Slack themselves, they publish a framework called Bold, and this is available in for various programming languages, so Python, Java, and also for JavaScript. And the Bold JavaScript framework is based on Express. So yeah, we chose to build the application with that, and as I was by then already annoyed that I had to write JavaScript, I decided that I take care about the infrastructure. So instead of coding, I put on my DevOps hat. And yeah, they were saying like, oh, GCP and cloud and serverless, but I was just renting a VM at Hetzner for $5, installed Ubuntu on it, which turned out to be later a bit of a problem. So yeah, we worked on this project for a week, and at the end of Hack Week, we always shoot like a video for like 5 minutes introducing the project, and then people can actually vote on it, right? And there are like 6 categories where you can win, and surprise, we did win. So we won a Hack Week award after like the whole company watched all the video submissions, which was crazy long. I think it took us over 3 hours. So yeah, and GibPotato won the Value People category. This is like one of our company values we have. And I think it makes sense for a Slack appreciation app to win there. So when it comes to how GibPotato actually works, it's a Slack app, right? So you install it into your Slack workspace, and then every day each user has to give out 5 or can give out 5 potatoes. So if someone did something helpful, was nice to you, helped you reviewing a PR, you can mention them on Slack with the username, write something nice, and then you attach a potato emoji at the end. So now you may ask, like, why is it a potato? So the system we used before, they use a taco emoji. But me being German, I thought like a potato is much more on brand, much more fitting. It also makes for a far better name, in my opinion. Like GibPotato sounds kind of neat. So I hope this makes sense. Yeah, so besides the Slack app, there's also like a small web UI written in Vue.js. And I built it with Tailwind CSS, or I styled it with Tailwind CSS. And so a hot take, yeah, I think Tailwind scales perfectly. People tend to disagree on this, but in my opinion, it's really, really good. It's definitely more than inline styles. And if you never use it, I would encourage you to give it a try. And then decide for yourself if you like it or not. So yeah, on this web app, people can access the leaderboard. And I think it's pure coincidence that I'm on top there, I promise. And we also have like a small shop where you can buy like small gifts for others to give out. So you have like something for your, you can do something with your potatoes. Yeah, so actually I want to give you a quick demo how GibPotato works in action. Okay, so this is the website. And then we need Slack, because it's in Slack app. Okay, this might be a little bit awkward. Okay, cool. So yeah, you add the GibPotato application to your workspace, and then you invite it to a channel, and then you mention someone, attach a potato, bam. And then the bot will ping you, telling you, hey, you gave one potato to some person, how many you have left today, when they will reset. And then over the years, I added more stuff. So we were using like a polling feature in Slack. Like it's not built into Slack, it's another Slack app. But they always start yelling at you after you used it like for 100 times per month, and then they want money, and they are also really expensive. So I was like, if there's GibPotato, now there's GibOpinion. So sorry, this is a bit awkward for me. Yeah, then people can vote. Perfect. So it's a bit clunky, as you have seen, but building like modals with Slack, it's really hard. So I didn't do it. Yeah, so that's what you can do on the Slack side. And when you actually go to the website, yeah, so you have a leaderboard where you can filter on various things. You have like the shop, but there's nothing in there. You see your collection, like other gifts people bought for you or what you bought for yourself. And then we recently also introduced quick wins. So when you tag a message with a potato and hashtag quick wins, it will be immortalized there and stays there forever. Yeah, and then there's like a little bit of account management, like your stats. There's also a progression system built in, so you can level up if you give and receive potatoes. So yeah, that's the demo. So we shipped this thing after Hack Week, and back then it was like really simple, right? So it was a Node.js app in the end, and it had like 200 lines of code. Like we put it all in one file. That's what you do in JavaScript. It's perfect, scales. And of course, like when we create new projects, by default, they are always public on GitHub, always. Like we always need a really good argument to not make something public. And so I licensed it, or I published this under the MIT license. But our legal department was like, oh, I see opportunity here. So GibPotato is actually the first piece of software Sentry ever released under the GPL. But not the GPL you think of. No, 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 no. The GibPotato license. So when you go to GitHub, we actually have the GibPotato license, and it's a small. That's so silly. It's like a small poem our head of open source wrote. So yeah, the thing was deployed, and now we could actually start to dog food with it. And being a node service, like back then we started to work on profiling, and Sentry runs a few Node.js apps, actually also a Slack app, funnily enough. And GibPotato was the perfect opportunity to test the profiling feature, right? Because like if it breaks, sad, but really doesn't matter. At least it doesn't affect any customers. So people started just to open pull requests. We merged them, deployed them, and then we could start testing this stuff and give feedback, iterate, fix bugs. And then also like my colleagues from the front-end team, they were like super happy because they finally had a Vue.js app they could dog food with, right? Because normally they only had React and their small sample apps, but oh, there was Vue.js. So, but because I'm a cool engineer, there were no front-end errors, obviously, right? Like, so we added actually like a small Easter egg where you have to type some random stuff, and then it actually throws an error. But this thing was running for a while, and people happily used it, but there was still a really big flaw in GibPotato. It was still not written in PHP. So then I thought, why not adding PHP to GibPotato? Why not making like a super simple app at this time crazy complicated? And why we added, like, let's move it into a serverless containerized environment, and let's throw Terraform on it, so infrastructure as code. And because back then, I also slowly started to take over the Go SDK, I was like, oh, let's also add Go there for simplicity. And that's exactly what I did. So I threw away the entire code base, rewrote it from scratch, and over the course of a few months, this thing came to be. And actually, in the end, a big reason why I chose Go was that the way how these Slack apps tend to work is that Slack sends a webhook, and they want to have a response really fast that you received it. So they're really picky about that. And when your PHP process is like making some HTTP calls during the request, I mean, this takes forever, right? And I was way too lazy to implement like a queuing system. So I wrote a small ingestion proxy in Go, which is called Portal. It's like the portal to Potato. So yeah, the Go proxy now, it accepts like all the webhooks, immediately sends back a 200 to Slack, so Slack is happy, spawns a Go routine, normalizes the event, because I only care about messages that contain a potato, right? All the others I throw away. And then the messages that are relevant, they get then forwarded to the PHP application. So yeah, almost 200 commits later, I merged it. Oh, someone even reviewed it. And now I had a Go and a PHP service running at Sentry, and now I could start dogfooding my stuff. So every time I ship a new feature in the Go SDK or the PHP SDK, the first thing I normally do is I just deploy it to GibPotato and see if it works, and let it running for a little bit. And that's super cool because like deploying something to GibPotato, this takes like 10 minutes. We use like Google Cloud Run now. It's like just a serverless container runtime. So as soon as I push something to GitHub, it starts to build and deploys it. And yeah, the cool thing was I actually built something people liked and use a lot. So since August 2022, we now gave out over 50,000 potatoes at Sentry. So it's quite an achievement, and yeah, super happy about this. Yeah, and I mean, again, people started to realize, oh, we have this app where we can iterate quickly. Let's install some alpha stuff into it because YOLO. So we had a new major version coming up. Not a major, but like we had like a new feature coming up, and yeah, just deployed it there, tested it, perfect. And there are like a lot of other things we improved on the product in the SDK by using GibPotato. So this is stuff like better issue grouping, right? Like if the same issue happens or the same error happens multiple times, instead of grouping them together, at one point we randomly created new issues, which then gets like super noisy and people are annoyed. And now we had like the PHP app, and we could just tweak our algorithms to group them better. Also, like for our tracing product, which I showed you yesterday in my workshop, it helped me a lot because, like, as you see, like it's quite a manual process when you use something like CakePHP where we don't have like an official SDK. And it really helped me like to design better APIs by just using it myself, right? Because if I hate using it, then the likelihood of others also not liking it, that helps a lot. So yeah, a lot of changes I made over the years now are basically also just inspired by me using the software I'm building, disliking it and changing it. Because I think Jose always said, be the change you want to see in the world, and I fully embrace this, yeah. And what was also nice about GibPotato, because like it runs in the same organization that all our other production services runs, and like GibPotato is like this tiny little thing that sends like a few events per minute, maybe, compared to like our other stuff. And we run into a lot of issues with new features in GibPotato because like our other stuff produces so much data that like when it comes to stuff like cardinality limiting, GibPotato always loses out. And this is always an amazing test bed for us because like most companies, they have like, let's say one massive product, but they also have smaller things on the side. And also having like this opportunity now just to improve the product based on that, yeah, that helped a lot. Yeah. This was also something that actually shipped in PHP first, like our new query module support for that. Again, sat down with the people working on that, just deployed it to GibPotato, bam. So really cool. And by now, I kind of actually turned it into a hobby. Every time a new product is on the horizon and people are like testing it internally, I'm immediately like, I want this, I want the dog food. We deploy to GibPotato. Come on, gib. So yeah. That's really, really cool. Also, like, when I started to work on the PHP profile, I had no idea how this even works, right? Like, and if it's even useful. And GibPotato, just having access to it, like, it was so crucial. Because, I mean, again, if you have just like some example block, the data it produces, it's just not helpful. And having some organic traffic in your application, you catch like maybe some weird side effects or some other stuff that doesn't work well. And yeah, with GibPotato, like I also don't have to pester any customers. Like, hey, can you please try this and tell us if it works? So yeah, that's great. Yeah, and like also like I remember like when we first like tried out our cron monitoring feature. I just discovered funny bugs, right? Like, so there's a cron job running every day that fetches all the users from the Slack API and updates them, right? Like, because sometimes people maybe change their username on Slack, maybe they change their profile picture, and then of course I want to have this represented on a leaderboard. And yeah, at one point it didn't work. Like I got a notification. And my cron didn't run it. Then I freaked out. I was like, oh God, what did I break? So I looked into the database, but everything looked fine, yeah. So actually, once again, just by dog fooding, we discovered like a bug in our monitoring, and we could fix it. So that really helps a lot. So maybe you now have like some understanding why I think dog fooding is so important, and a lot of other people at Sentry agree with me, but why should you care, right? always try to be your own customer. So try to use the stuff you build. If you run a web shop, buy a few products from time to time yourself, right? And then you can refund yourself afterwards. Like, you create a new account, you check the user flow. You could like rely on automated tests, right? But an automated test doesn't have a taste in UX or how the UI behaves. That you can only like find out by manual testing. Dog fooding helps a lot finding problems before others do. And that also helps a lot because not receiving these angry emails or not being yelled at on Twitter because your stuff is broken, that's a good thing. So like just being proactive by just dog fooding your stuff, that helps a lot. And lastly, like you can just try out new stuff also, like in some real world use case, right? I mean, of course, it's always a little bit hard because it really depends, like in what kind of engineering you do. Like for an SDK, of course, it makes sense to have like an application I can test it in. But yeah, I think in the end, you maybe can come up with some idea how you like could just develop like a sense for dog fooding. Cool. And with that, I'm saying thank you. If you want to look at this yourself, you can find it on our GitHub. There are no dogs, so good luck, have fun. It works very well for us. Thank you.